On today's episode, Dr. Nick and I discuss heroine habits. So you need to see that the E is in brackets on there.
The heroines who wrote about heroin.
Yeah. I have my own drug literature history that happened when I was 15 or 14 or 15, I can't remember now. And it actually got me grounded by my mother for a whole year. I was not allowed to go out. We don't talk about that in this episode.
No.
But we could.
Because it's about the metaphor.
It's about the metaphor.
We're not condoning drug use.
We're not condoning drug. It wasn't very significant, really. Stay to the end. Watch the whole thing. It's wonderful. You will want to pick up this book for your holiday reading. And check out the launch.
On the 18th of December at the Lane, Palmwoods, from 6 p.m. Oh, I must say, Aunt McKenna, as in Alf and Ant, is playing there, and Dr. Claire Archeline will be speaking.
Fabulous.
Speaker.
All right. So find Peripheral Arts on the internet and you can register your interest. Thank you. Hello and welcome to Stories from the Red Couch, episode 69. I'm Robin Cook and today my guest is Dr. Nycole Prowse.
Hello.
Hi Nick, how are you going?
Great. I can't believe I'm sitting on the red couch.
I know, and episode 69, so you...
The year I was born.
And the lunar landing, it all happened.
The Beatles did split up that year, but that was probably a good thing. You know, we wouldn't have had John Lennon's solo career.
No. Welcome.
Thank you.
Now, it is Dr. Nycole Prowse, but it's not medical doctor. So tell me about that.
No, that's right. I'm not actually. Once I said to a friend, you know, I'm not a brain surgeon. I'm not going to be able to save people's lives. And the friend said, actually, you do save hearts. You do save lives because really, my doctorate is in literature, and I think it really exemplifies, you know, the importance of stories and how, you know, I've really dedicated my life to stories. And I have this fundamental belief that everyone should be allowed or enabled to share their stories. So, yeah, I'm a doctor of stories.
I think that's fantastic because I mean, I don't have a doctorate in it, but I also feel very strongly about the need to share stories and to enable people who probably don't have much opportunity to have their story heard, to have their story heard.
That's it. You know, and I think it's the fundamental common denominator with all humans. I think it, you know,
A bit like food and sex, isn't
well,
it?
yeah, and then mix it all together and you've got a great evening.
Story.
But you know, stories have crossed time, they've crossed cultures, they cross race, they cross gender. It is fundamentally, I think, part of the human, you know, psyche.
And they're told in many ways, aren't they?
That's it.
It's not just verbal or written, through dance,
through art, through film, through, you know, cinema. And I think that's what Peripheral Arts, the organisation that I founded, really focused on, that people tell stories in many different ways. And our First Nations people have known this for, you know, millennia. You know, and so it's just, I think we've had the great forgetting in kind of certain Western cultures about the significance of that. Because it's not just about having the right skills to express your story in any way you wish, but it's about listening. And I think we do both. We're sort of encouraging people to share stories, you know, and listen to people's stories. And I think fundamentally, it really, I think a lot of the crisis that we have, you know, in social health, you know, across the board is because we've forgotten
how to tell
the deep
stories,
importance of stories,
and how to listen.
That's it.
Yeah, because you can tell your story, but unless someone actually listens,
it's not a story.
It's not.
I mean, it's a story. I think stories and literature have, you know, they have three key things. And I think one is that they help us, whether we listen or read a story or speak our own story, it helps us understand who we are, but it also helps us understand each other, and it helps us understand the world we live in. And so, you know, that kind of connection through that. And I think valuing the kind of creativity that takes. You know, we've all got it.
We have.
There isn't, I don't like the noun creative.
No, because it
sort of exclude. It says that some people are creative and some
others
people
aren't. Yeah, no,
you know,
that's just crazy. It is. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And at what point do you lose that, or were you just not born with it? No,
Yeah,
I agree with you.
And a lot of people, the last time they've been asked to be creative, for some people, was kindergarten.
Yes.
You know, where you're allowed to be joyous and creative. And so, you know, Peripheral Arts really, that's another driving force behind what we do.
So what's an example of the work that you've been doing recently with Peripheral Arts?
Oh, look, we had this great intergenerational women's story crafting and maskmaking. Oh, look, it was fabulous. So women between the ages of 14 and 82,
Wow.
strangers. And this recurs in every single workshop we do. It doesn't matter what group or what community we go into. And what I love is that the first part of our workshop is helping people through lots of different mediums locate and express their individual stories.
Okay.
And we have this thing called a campfire, you know, where everyone's sort of sharing, and, you know, we have to create and hold that beautiful, respectful space, because it's a really vulnerable space.
It is.
But vulnerability is power. I think
Yes.
that's when you grow, when you're being vulnerable. And then the second part of our series, our workshop series, is when we start creating a collaborative story. So you can imagine you've got 20 people who've never met each other for about 4 weeks sharing these individual stories.
And how much time for each session?
2 hours a week.
That's great.
And do you know the latest statistic? If you do something creative and artistic 2 hours a week, you absolutely will benefit your mental health. So this is a statistic from, you know, people who are researching it. And then what happens is that in that kind of individual storytelling, a thread, you know, that narrative arc starts happening. So it's all about respecting difference, but then it's always, we end with this collaborative story to find this connection. And then what happens with these beautiful people who so trustingly, you know, come along in our process, which is participant-led. So we can't kind of say, this is what you're going to have at the end. You know, it's all up to them.
Yeah.
And then they go on to form friendships, to help each other, to start writing groups themselves. We've got one, you know, I can give you a million examples. One group from the Belong Community Centre in Brisbane, they're now doing an Anywhere Theatre performance in Anywhere Theatre together based on Annalee Junction. And
how fabulous.
Yeah, so that sort of
cool is
stuff.
that? That's beautiful.
Individuals who, you know, from our first workshop 3 years ago, who were 6 women, you know, who had no work, really, you know, sort of had a bit of a loss of direction. Out of just that one group, we've got an artist who is commissioned, another artist who runs a regional gallery, 2 women who went on to study literature at university, and another one who's now a community development officer in Toowoomba.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So these women were...
Joined a group that we began, a story crafting, very simple story crafting
That's
group.
fantastic.
So that's individually, but then I think socially you see what happens. And actually we have worked a lot with women.
Yes.
And there is another great statistic that, you know, I came across years ago, that if you assist a man and help a man, you know, you're helping one person, and that's fabulous, you know. But if you assist a woman and help a woman to find her creativity, you're assisting 22 is the number, 22 other people. So,
That's astonishing. What an amazing statistic.
It is.
That's really incredible.
Yeah. But I'm getting more excited to do just, you know, groups with men as well,
Yeah,
because
of
I think
course.
there is that kind of need. And I think really society hasn't allowed that. I think in the pub situation, you know, where you could
Sure.
face the bar,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
the old...
That side-along conversation is something that I've seen in, you know, when talking to men and men talking together.
Yeah.
Whereas women...
We need to see each
Yeah,
other.
we tend to do that.
But I think that's changing. As society is, you know, stopping that kind of stranglehold on gender, those things are slipping as well, which is lovely.
And that is fantastic. Now, I was going to say, in that sharing of the story in that 2 hours that you're having over that period of time, what I really love about talking to someone that I don't know is you don't get that internal dialogue that you often get, not always, but often get when you're talking to a friend about the same things over and over again. And when you speak to somebody that you don't know, they do actually listen.
It's a freedom.
Yeah, because they're not anticipating what you're saying to prepare a response.
So true. They really are strangers in the group who become friends. And I think you're right. I think that's why I love traveling. Often it's the people who love you the most, the people who you've grown up with, who can be the ones who say, oh, you don't do that, or you're this person. So
absolutely,
yeah,
yes.
And we are allowed to become and continually become until the last breath, And so, yeah, having that space where you can just be a new part of you.
Is that part of, so coming back to literature and the transformative effect of literature, in stories where there's a coming of age and a moving away, is that part of what that is about, where people can move away from their family or their home and go on a journey or travel and come back as that different person?
It is travelling to a different world, exactly. It's a literary world. And I mean, I know people often say they love books. I think it's because of that kind of travel, that literary travel that you do, where you can explore different parts of yourself in a very private way too, without that kind of constraint of what is expected of you.
Yeah. Now, you have written a book.
I have.
Congratulations. Well done. It's so exciting and so beautiful. Have a look at how exquisite this is. And how many years in the making?
Look, it was 12 years. And that sounds ridiculous.
No, it's not, because that means that I think what people say now is that we flick through and we scroll through and we know a little bit about so many things, but we know almost nothing in depth.
Yeah, I think that's a really important comment, because we have so much information at our fingertips.
We have so much.
But knowledge is actually when you get a piece of information, another piece of information, and you create something anew.
Which is what this is.
And it is. There's a lot of bits and pieces that went into it. So it began, I always knew I wanted to, I like finishing things, and I knew the PhD was my final piece of education. And I think any advice I give to someone, don't do a PhD unless you're passionate and you're doing it just for education's sake, or just for going through that process of really pushing yourself to that level. You have to find something original. You have to read everything that's ever been written on that topic. You have to embrace the argument. So lots of conference papers, lots of little publications went behind this book, lots of tears, lots of talking, and 3 amazing supervisors. So I got 3, Dr. Harriet Beasley, Dr. Francesco Riccardi, and Dr. Claire Archeline, who was my principal supervisor, all 3 very different disciplinary areas. So it is amazing, to have this support. But it actually began 12 years ago with one of my mentors, Dr. Brian Musgrove, sitting on his back porch. You're not allowed to do this anymore. You're not allowed to hang out with your lecturers and stuff anymore. Dear. It's a different world, university, from where we went.
Well, that's disappointing.
Yeah, and I said, I think I know what I want to write. I want to do a PhD about women and health and mental health. I want to study Virginia Woolf and blah, blah. And he just looked at me and said, Nick, it has been done to death. But if the same kind of theory, the same kind of focus, why don't you have a look at women who've written about addiction? And he said, nothing is there. And he was right. So a lot of the critical work focus on the male, the mainstream male drug writers, so Kerouac and Ginsberg and all those guys. And it was kind of like Dale Spender back in the 1980s, who said, I went into a bookstore and it was like women never wrote books. Where are all the women on these shelves? I had to go pretty deep and pretty underground to find female drug writers.
Yes.
And you know what? Prolific. Probably wrote more than
Really?
men using that drug metaphor. Yeah, amazing. But I had to. The most interesting underground was I think it was the U.S. Underground Writers Association, and the way to contact them was through this guy in San Francisco who self-published a lot of, female poets and stuff that wrote at the same time as the beat poets, but just didn't get a voice. Yeah, so it's about voicing stories.
Yeah.
That's where it began. And what was fascinating is that as the journey continued, so much other stuff came. So the PhD is actually a comparison between male drug writers and female drug writers from 200 years ago all the way up. And I really just focused on the women for this book. There's a chapter looking at the male writers, because you need to have, what is the import of the female drug writers. And I focused on the writing of the drug trope of heroin and opiates and opium, because it's such an extremity. It's such something that has that sort of societal kind of extreme about it. So I thought that's going to be a really interesting trope to find. And what I found is every single male drug writer, the character in the book, it was really dark. It was really, there was a loss of self, a loss of agency, a hopelessness, and dark and grotesque. I mean, Burroughs is very difficult to read. Whereas every single example of female drug writing with the opium trope, it was transcendent, it was positive, it was like they're like gorillas, because the drug trope, using drugs in the literature allowed the women a freedom from the constraints of society.
Okay, yes.
Whereas the men who are privileged in that society,
already in that position,
they get thrown out of that society. There is this kind of crisis. But it really is a beautiful story about the women. It's not a story, it's a pretty dense book, but I think people might find the chapters about the women and their particular writing fascinating.
So have you got some examples of a particular writer?
Oh, look, Elizabeth Barrett Browning's there, Anna Kavan, but look, my favourite is Emily Hahn. And when I learnt and read about her life, she was the first woman in the 1930s in America to get a degree in engineering, because they said she couldn't or shouldn't. She then walked through the Belgian Congo by herself with a monkey for weeks on end. She was a spy in Hong Kong, but the most interesting thing, I think, in relation to the book, is that she went to Shanghai to start a journal. And she says, this is quote, I didn't go to Shanghai to become an opium addict, which she did for 2 years, then got off it, and then went back and had this amazing career afterwards. But it was just up there, she said. Becoming an opium addict was just up there, along with, being a firefighter, joining the circus, the kind of thing. So she was just this incredible woman. So then she does that two-year trip, has a child, out of wedlock, crazy, wild, radical woman. She goes back to New York, and she writes for the New Yorker until she's 97, and only died recently,
That's incredible.
The last decade. So, all of these kind of representations of women who use drugs. So, I'm really pushing ideas and boundaries here. I'm not condoning drugs. I've never used heroin, all of that sort of stuff. What it's really informing society, I think. It's sort of showing you, why are there constraints? How are people positioned in society if it's so vastly different in the literary world, So
that's fascinating. And now you're about to launch this, aren't you?
I am.
Tell me about that.
I am launching it on the 18th of December at Palmwoods, at the beautiful lane, just behind Homegrown. And I've decided to do it under the jacaranda trees, because a lot of the women who wrote using the drug metaphor, they weren't in dark, dank, warehouses, they wrote and brought that beautiful kind of pastoral, natural world into the joyous writing about their about drug use. So I think it needed to be
out in the
outside,
fresh air, under the trees.
Yep, and we're supplying champagne and food.
That sounds fantastic.
It's a celebration.
Yeah, of course it is.
The ending.
Well, there's a tremendous amount of work in this, and it needs to be celebrated, because you're not just celebrating yourself, are you? You're celebrating all of these women who you've studied.
It's again just voicing stories, unheard stories, and really to thank. So a dear friend of mine once said, you know, doing a PhD is the loneliest thing you'll ever do, but you've got to drag everybody else along with you. And you know, it's a time to thank all those people in the last 12 years who, you know, particularly my poor husband and my daughter who's 12. So
she's only known
she
life.
was actually, you know, we were still one when I gave my first conference paper, and so she's grown with the book.
How fabulous is that? That's brilliant. So how can people, so it's the 18th of December, it's down in Palmwoods at the Lane.
Yep.
Do people need to book? Do they need to
I'd
tell
appreciate
you?
it. We've just put it on our Peripheral Arts Facebook page.
Okay.
So there's an invitation, open public invitation, and people can just say going, interested, or can't make it on there. So
brilliant.
we can,
All right. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you for telling me about this. This is going to be my holiday reading now.
Oh my gosh, it's you know, it's dense, but I think the important thing to remember is that this is very small, and there were literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of really wonderful theorists, amazing pieces of literature that I have condensed for you. So you don't have to read all that.
Yeah, but can we go and find, so we could go and find some of these books
you have
and
a beautiful
stories.
bibliography, a reference list.
Yeah, and we can explore that ourselves.
That's it.
All right. Thanks, Nick.
Oh,
Thanks for coming.
Robin.
It's so wonderful.
So nice. All these amazing women you've had. I felt very nervous about, very humbled to join the Red Couch.
Well, I feel privileged to be able to share some of the stories of some of the, you know, the women and men, because we have men on here as well.
So we're doing it, and that's right. You know, it's really important. Everybody has a story.
Yeah, thank you. That's it then. Thank you for watching. We will be back next week, and look for this book and go and explore some of the women writers that you'll find in there that Nick has been talking about. Thank you. Thank you. It wasn't so hard. No, it wasn't so hard, was it? It wasn't so hard.
Oh really? Oh, you know
so well.
Oh, I'm so, you know, just look at your beautiful eyes. You are so born to do this.
Yeah.